this is from the 9 hours of radio dispatch. We've only skimmed the surface. This is all within like the first few hours. But I want to play. I want to play this part here for you.
Norfolk wants you to shut down, get out of the elements, take your truck. He wants all vampires in their trucks. I got to get a hold of Greg and tell them to do the same thing. They want everybody out of the element right now. They want everybody in a vehicle. All right?
And so, in case you had a hard time hearing there too, it's Norfolk wants you to shut down, get out of the elements. Everybody needs to get into a vehicle. And whoever it is on the radio there is specifically saying Norfolk wants you to shut down, get out of the elements, get into a vehicle. That is tough to hear for folks.
At that point, the consensus was the fire had been contained, which you could say what that means. But if the fire has been contained, why would Norfolk Southern be telling first responders to get back to their trucks?
To be honest with you, at least in my past history of being at an almost exact incident, like I was explaining to you guys before, back in 2006, we had a train derailment in New Brighton that involved ethanol. And there were several tankers that had come off the railroad tracks and went down into the bank of the Beaver River, and massive fire, same situation. The emergency blow-offs that they had on the tanker cars were working just fine. And from what I've seen photo-wise of the East Palestine incident, the rail cars were not even close to being as damaged as they were in New Brighton. And that chemical ethanol is just as explosive as what was in East Palestine. We were never told to evacuate the area. We were just basically told to step back from the scene a little bit, but continue our operations in cooling down the tanker cars and suppressing the fire. And obviously, from videos and everything like that, the fire, at least from what I saw, was not fully suppressed at that time. So for them to give that order and it come from Norfolk Southern, that doesn't make any sense, because ultimately, besides the information that is going towards the first responders, the ultimate decision of the fire suppression should be up to the incident commander, which I'm guessing would have been Keith Drabeck at the time. But yeah, for Norfolk Southern to actually give that order for them to evacuate and get in their vehicles, to me, that doesn't really make any sense.
Well, we should also say the firefighter has now acknowledged that he wasn't there at that point. He was out of town. So
the fire chief.
Okay, well, whoever at that time was the incident commander,
right, should have been the one.
They should have gathered information again, like what we were saying earlier. The conductor and the engineer should have been there to give the initial first responders the information of the manifest of what was in those tankers. After that, it's up to the fire department to decide what their operations are going to be and how they're going to handle it. They should have at least had basic knowledge of the emergency valves on those tanker cars and know whether or not they were blevying off or anything like that. But from everything I saw video-wise, there was no legit reason for them to evacuate that area that soon without the fire being completely, fully suppressed.
Right. One clarifying question for you. So you said you've worked on train derailments, other hazardous incidents, plenty of fires, all this sort of stuff. Has there ever been an instance where the owner of the facility or if it's a factory or a business or a derailment, where the owner of the facility in that case ever makes the call like that? Because that seems wild to me. You said that it seemed out of the ordinary, but has that ever happened before to you?
No, never on an incident that I've been in. Again, their responsibility should have just been to give information on the manifest, what kind of chemicals were in the cars. And ultimately, again, the fire suppression should have been 100% in charge in the fire department standpoint. That should not have been a decision that Norfolk Southern made. The only decision that they should have been involved with, which I'm sure obviously they were, was them putting that shape charge on the tank and blowing it up. But I mean, even then, it still should be coordinated with the fire department, and that decision should have been made by both parties.
Right.
And let's play the second part to that, because this is also, I believe, first responders saying we're shutting down after Norfolk Southern stated so.
We're shutting down right now, getting out of the element. If you can just do whatever you can to protect your trucks from freezing and overheating, we're just going to stand by for right now. Copy that. I'll shut the line down now.
And again, in case folks are having a hard time hearing, they're generally saying, you know, we're this is a firefighter on the radio saying we're pulling back, do whatever you can to prevent your engines from freezing or overheating. For folks, it was single digits that night, so 7 degrees. In some of these radio communications, there's a lot of conversation about frozen hoses and all of that sort of stuff.
So can I ask you, when they're saying getting out of the elements, do you infer that as getting out of the temperature or getting out of the fire?
Well, on Norfolk Southern standpoint, if they're the ones that are claiming that, you know, they were giving the order to get out of the elements, the only thing I can think of is them talking about a vapor leak out of one of the tanker cars and the possibility of that combusting. But then again, I'm sorry, with the amount of fire that was on scene there, there's no way that would have been a possibility. There's no way.
It just also seems odd to me because from multiple people Lewis has spoke with, I've spoken with, around this time, they're saying the fire was contained. And I was told by other first responders that if a fire is contained, that's kind of when you put your foot on the gas, no pun intended, and you throw more resources at it if you have them. So if the fire's contained, wouldn't pulling resources off it risk it getting out of control again?
100%. Yeah. No, the basic last resort they should have been doing is hitting those tanker cars from a distance with what we call a deck gun or a stinger, where it's a portable, basically water cannon that you can set up, and the distance that it can flow water gives you a safe gap in between you and the incidents, and still allows you to continue to keep cooling those tanks and continuing to make sure that there's no secondary flare-ups or anything like that. So that just, to me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, another area that I guess that we can pop into here, obviously, like getting a hold of what is on board the train is kind of a major area of importance here. The first responders need to know what is there, and it seems like there was a lot of issues surrounding actually getting the manifest in hand. So as well as where, you know, how they're obtaining the manifest. So I'm going to play 2 clips here. The first one is in regards to trying to track down the actual conductor of the train, the person who's in the front of it. You know, some of the early reports, I'll let folks listen to it, but they didn't really know where the conductor actually was. We can go ahead and listen.
There's nothing hooked to the train. It's just sitting here by itself. The main train is gone.
So you can hear there, they were, you know, any luck with the conductor was the first question, and then eventually it says the main train is gone. From my understanding, it is protocol to actually to unhook the front of the train and pull forward a bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Gotcha. But they shouldn't just disappear, right?
No, for them to completely leave the scene without coordinating with first responders and giving them the information of what's in those cars, no, that's, and unless their SOPs have changed, which that again doesn't make any sense.
Right.
They should not have just up and left like that without coordinating with the first responders.
Right.
Well, I also want to point out, I think the times to this is important that we marked it down, because that's at give or take 9:18 p.m. So we're talking about a half hour after the derailment.
Right.
So at least the emergency responders, unless this is a bad case of one hand isn't talking to the other one, at least the emergency responders have not been approached by the conductor or the engineer for at least a half hour. But a couple minutes later, if this was the next clip you were going to play, Lewis, a couple minutes later, somebody on the dispatch, and again, we can't identify who's talking on the dispatch, says this.
There's a consist here. I'm not sure exactly where it's derailed. We're trying to get eyes on it now.
Okay.
But yeah, there's hazardous material scattered throughout the whole train.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
MS, please, do we need to send this consist anywhere?
What was that? Actually, the fire department needs to, if they have to go to fax it or email it.
And again, just to recap that for folks, because I know some of this is difficult to hear, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but in general, there's somebody on the radio with dispatch saying, there's a consist here, I'm not sure where the train derailed, so it seems like they're trying to figure out which cars actually derailed, which ones are there, but he makes the statement that there are multiple hazardous cars spread throughout the entire train, and they're not sure where it derailed, and then at the end of it, they're asking, is there somewhere we need to send this to, essentially. Yeah, I mean, in your experience, would a manifest or a consist, those words seemingly seem to be used interchangeably a bit, but would that normally be something that would be handed from a conductor? Is that, what sort of normal communication would be happening there?
Well, initially, at least, again, the incident that I was at New Brighton, right after the derailment happened, and they did separate the locomotive from the initial derailment, as soon as they moved it up several hundred yards up the track, the conductor and the engineer both got out and coordinated with the incident commander, the chief of New Brighton's fire department, immediately informed them of what was inside those tanks. And basically after that, it's up to us to formulate a plan how we're going to attack, whether we're going to use water, foam, whatever. We're going to basically overlook all of the tanker cars in the incident and figure out whether or not it's safe to how close we need to be. But no matter what, there has to be some type of water suppression being put on that,
right,
to prevent further explosions or causing harm to local residents in the area.
Right.